welcome to Worlds Apart. In less than 2 months, our notion of a work-life balance has been turned on its head, with many of us longing for the things we used to loathe about our jobs and resenting the things we used to revere about our private lives. The historically unprecedented response to the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely messed up with our life settings. What will the default be like once it's over? Well, to discuss that, I'm now joined by Ekaterina Schulmann, a Russian political scientist and a popular YouTuber. Ekaterina, it's always a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for carving out time.
Thank you for asking me out. It's a kind of job and the life balance all over again. When you get up to your study, it's a kind of going to work thing. So it brings a kind of diversity to your day.
And in fact, I think you in particular have been talking about the merging of work and private life as a major social and labor trend for quite some time. And I think you would agree with me that it's
ago.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to say, but it's reached its unexpected apogee with this onset of self-isolation. I wonder if you have had a chance to adjust to it well.
On one hand, we are the privileged people, the academicians. We used to live this way before it was mainstream. On the other hand, it's evident that it's not normal and that it shouldn't continue. It shouldn't be like that. A surprising thing for me was not how easily I adapt. There was nothing much to adapt to, but rather the opposite thing. I suddenly realized, although maybe I should have known it before, the social component of social sciences. I was always so much against talking to sources or using inside information. I was always saying that it's all out there in the open sources, in official documents, but now I see that there is this thing, and that's not insider information. But this is being in the atmosphere with the people and institutions you study, visiting even the official events that used to be so senseless and such a loss of time. Once you are deprived of all this, you begin to perceive how the quality of your work deteriorates.
Well, I hate to break it to you, we are social species, and it applies to bookworms like yourself just as much as to everybody else. Now, I heard you say a couple of years back that work, especially a fulfilling work that brings not just income, but other forms of gratification, will one day become a luxury. And I think that nowadays, any kind of work is actually a privilege, especially coupled with state-mandated restrictions on social mobility. How much longer do you think states around the world can afford to maintain that?
No government in the world has an interest in keeping its citizens locked up. So the idea that the virus will go, but these rules and restrictions will remain, I think it's a kind of a panicky, scare idea. The governments of the world are very much interested in lifting these restrictions, but they are evidently and reasonably scared of doing this in such a way as to provoke another wave of infection. I think we should worry about the oncoming level of poverty that will be faced by millions and millions of Russian citizens and of people all around the world. Some of this will be temporarily. Restaurants and coffee shops will come back. Services will revive. But some jobs lost will indeed be lost forever to those people who lose them. The advantages of working for the state are evident right now because these people receive their salaries while staying at home. But once the staying at home period will be over, these advantages will not be over. The state has been a primary job giver in Russia since a long time ago, but specifically since 2014, the number of people directly or indirectly indebted to the state for their salaries has grown. It will likely grow even more because other payable workplaces will be scarce, and this is not a very good thing.
Well, I think no state is in a good shape right now, regardless of their political system. And I would claim that this is perhaps the most consequential catch-22 situation when there is simply no easy solutions. But I also see a lot of discontent building up around the world at the notion that the states around the world, with very, very few exceptions, would prioritize health considerations of a very limited group of people. We are talking about 10 to 15% of the population whom this virus afflicts badly, that their health considerations would be prioritized over everything else. Given where we are right now, do you think it was ultimately a good call on the part of the authorities to, put these people on the pedestal and ignore everything else? Because at the end of the day, this is an issue of priorities. Everything has its cost.
I cannot be the judge of this. The governments of the world have been acting in a remarkably similar manner, as you notice, no matter whether they're democracies or autocracies. And this, for political science, this has been one of the remarkable things to watch and to analyze. The measures have been very much similar. Even the legislation enacted and employed during this weeks of crisis has very large similarities. So it's not the question of autocracies being more effective or democracies being more effective. It's rather the question of everyone being in the same boat. Mm-hmm. But this similarity rather should tell us that these so diverse governments have the reason for acting like they act, even at so great an economic cost.
And what would that be?
The cost?
Well, I heard you say before that the reason why, states around the world were compelled to behave the way or to react the way they reacted was because of the appreciation in the value of human life. And I take a major issue with that, because the saved lives of COVID-19 patients are likely to come at the cost of many other lives. We are talking about other patients who weren't able to travel for life-saving treatment abroad. We are talking about the victims of domestic abuse, which is likely to have increased over these stressful times. We are talking about people who lost their livelihoods or mental health because of this ordeal. When we look at the human cost of both the pandemic and the response to it comprehensively, is it really such a humanistic response? Isn't it actually saving some and forsaking the others?
We cannot speak of the long-term consequences because we do not know them. We do not know what would the situation be if there were no restrictive measures enacted at all. Imagine the pandemic going unchecked.
Well, we don't need to imagine that. We can look at the example of Sweden, and it's clear that at this point the number of fatalities is slightly higher, but it's not overwhelmingly higher. So I think we have some indications that these, chaos scenarios that many people were painting and many scientists were painting and submitting to the governments may have been overstated.
Again, I cannot be the judge of that, not being a medical specialist or even a specialist in economy. But I must have an issue with this Swedish example. Sweden is not a country that did nothing about the pandemic. Sweden is a country that did not employ legislative and police restrictions on its citizens. Those pictures of full restaurants in Stockholm are rather misleading. There was a governmental advice to people to stay at home, and a lot of them did. And the culture of connectivity, the fabric of social life in northern countries is different from southern countries. So they do have a kind of quarantine, but it's recommendation, it's not restriction.
Absolutely, I agree with you, but it's far more differentiated response than the blanket ban that was imposed or recommended in some countries. Now, when I was thinking about it, what came to my mind is the culture, this so-called phenomenon of safetyism that we see in some US colleges, which creates a moral hazard for college administrators to overreact to every complaint from a student, and which ultimately imperils education and critical thinking. And I wonder if, together with this COVID-19 pandemic, we are also witnessing the outbreak of safetyism on the part of the governments when they think that it's better to be safe than sorry, even though this maxim has not been proven to be correct.
You may be both safe and sorry. You may be safe from one sort of threat and sorry about other kind of consequences that come upon you. But when I was saying and continue to say that these measures around the world has been the consequence of the high value of human life. I was talking exactly about that. There is a dark side even to the higher cost of human life, because it imposes a certain duty on any public government. So it can't just say, let's let life go on as it did. The sick will get sick, somebody will die, we'll try to help those we may help, but then we are going on with the business as usual. That is impossible. They need to show that they take a stance.
But Ekaterina, this is not
even,
the only.
even if this is costly, even this is
that's not the
irrational.
only. But that's not the only alternative. I hear that all the time, including on the Russian state-owned channels, this kind of argumentation. But we know that this is a highly discriminative virus. It goes primarily after people with pre-existing conditions. To put it bluntly, the sick and the fat. You know, type 2 diabetes is the prevailing disease among this population. And I don't understand, I haven't heard anyone articulate clearly, why do we have to isolate everybody and bring the economy to a halt instead of isolating this specific risky population, which has the highest chance of ending up in the emergency care units, as opposed to everybody else who has either very slight symptoms or no symptoms at all.
Again, I'm a very wrong person to put this question to, but what I can say in these circumstances, let's watch the consequences. That's what we social scientists do. Let's wait till the end of the quarantine measures and see how the economy rebounds. In the healthy economy, this rebound may be quite speedy, and then we'll say thank you to these democratic and autocratic governments that imposed blanket restrictions, and then so they lessened the cost, the human cost of the pandemic, and then everything came back to normal. If this will serve as a kind of accelerator to an economic crisis or an economic stagnation that has already been on its way, then it will be a whole different thing. In case of Russia, we are in a kind of another basket. We do have the virus problem, but we also have the economic stagnation problem that was there before, and we have the unprecedented oil prices crisis, which has not even begun to take real consequences. We will see, for example, a sequestering of our federal budget. We will see the budget deficit. We will see the necessary inevitable cutting of spending, of budgetary spending, at the very moment when society as a whole is expecting the state to help.
Well, Ekaterina, before you turn into a full-fledged prophet of the apocalypse, let's take a very, very short break, but we will come back to this.
We have seen these things before. We have survived them. If you want some real apocalyptic prophecy, you should, I could name a few names. So there are people who are better in this genre than me. So I'm still being very modest.
I will definitely be interested in exploring this field, but after a short break. Let's take a moment, but we will be back in just a few seconds. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Worlds Apart with Ekaterina Schulmann, a Russian political analyst. Ekaterina, just before the break, we were talking about how COVID-19 is a highly discriminative virus, which primarily goes to people with pre-existing conditions. And speaking specifically about type 2 diabetes and other metabolic disorders, I think at this point it is absolutely clear that they make COVID-19 far deadlier than it otherwise would have been. And even before this pandemic, these kind of diseases, self-inflicted diseases, diseases of a lifestyle, were already bankrupting public healthcare sectors in many countries because of their snowballing costs. For example, just in the United States, about a third of federal budget goes into Medicare, and about a third of Medicare is type 2 diabetes. Now, the question I want to ask you is about the prevailing social norms. For the time being, we treat health as our personal issue. Do you think that's a sustainable social norm at a time when societies are expected to make such dramatic sacrifices to treat these diseases that are easily preventable?
We do not know whom the virus goes after. We have a lot of data, but it's chaotic data so far. We'll be able to fully judge only when it's over. And second, I would not describe any disease as self-inflicted. Although, of course, there is a connection between your way of life and the way you feel. There's also genetics, there's hereditary inclination or disinclination towards a certain type of disease. So it's not a thing you can blame a person on for having. Having made those two points, I can proceed to your original questions about this specific type of privacy. And this is a very interesting thing, and this is my kind of thing because it's social and it's political. There's a term biopolicy or biopolitics. The way the state or society, through the medium of the laws and written and non-written norms, interferes or directs your physical functioning. What things are allowed and what are prohibited in doing with your body or with the body of your loved ones, with your children. How far can a parent judge, for example, whether or not to vaccinate a child? So before that, we've been on this general liberal ground of my body, my decision, and if I harm myself with making these decisions, it's my own thing. You shouldn't interfere with me. Society, even liberal society, made a stop at the child-parental relations because on one hand we tend to perceive the family as a castle, as a safe haven of privacy. At the same time, we as society cannot tolerate the full parental power over a child, the power of pater familias on a Roman basis. So we do interfere, society's legislative systems interfere. But now it comes to a new phase of development when this general health, this epidemiological safety is perceived as a kind of public good to be defended by the full force of the law enforcing state. It's interesting how these things will develop, but we may be sure that they will develop. Maybe we will see, for example, thermometers in public places as a customary thing, as we have those safety restrictions after the major terrorist attacks. And now we got used during the last 20 years that we are being searched, our bags are being opened, that we go through frames. At the airports, at any public location. Maybe we'll see the same kind of frames that will measure our body temperature. Or maybe
what about our body weight? Because this is one of the major factors, risk factors for a host of diseases, including COVID-19. It's a major risk factor. Is body weight, what you put in your body, is that going to be only your decision? Or is it going to be, at least in part, a matter of society? Because at the end of the day, you ask a society to pick up the bill for your ravaged health in later years.
Well, you may recollect how a number of scandals erupted recently about high prices for airplane tickets for people waiting over a certain number of kilograms, and it was a whole host of public questions whether companies have the right to charge high prices, whether it's fat shaming, whether it's discrimination or not. And now that was an innocent debate in times of peace. Now it becomes a whole new thing. So at the next step, the real question is the question of policy measures. How do you enforce those things that you think beneficial for society? Do you fine people for waiting more than, again, a certain figure? Or do you educate children in healthy lifestyle, and do you teach every school child to cook, for example? And in this way, you try to make your society healthier. This may be the borderline between autocracies and democracies.
You make it into a distinction between autocracies and democracies, and yet we know that democracies on this front are the most paralyzed. I mean, the mortality rate in the United States from COVID-19 is the highest in the world, and it's the highest in the states with the highest rates of obesity. And I heard you say recently that consumerism, which is very directly related to obesity, consumerism is here to stay. COVID-19 is not going to kill it. And at the center of consumerism is a sick, frail, metabolically and perhaps mentally compromised individual that requires a lot of services. When we talk about the value of human life, is that really the kind of life that we have to cherish, that we have to aspire to protect? We know that the United States, which pays a lot, spends a lot on healthcare, is on the verge of bankruptcy. Its healthcare is on the verge of bankruptcy because it's not sustainable. There are doctors who are talking about dementia as type 3 diabetes because many diabetics go on to develop dementia. And if you imagine, this whole population of diabetics and demented people who our children will have to take care of, I think it's a question of intergenerational, solidarity and fairness. Why should our children take care and pay for our excesses?
You imagine our children, the general generation of our children, as just this very healthy people who won't have any disabilities themselves. Us and our children are the beneficiaries of this society, which allows people to survive, which helps people with various sorts of disabilities to adapt and to become members of society. So we can't be going back to Sparta and to kill all the newborns who do not adhere to the standard, to the 100%.
This is not what I meant. We can also go into the notion of personal responsibility and stating that you owe your good health not only to yourself, but also to society, because at the end of the day, this is an easily preventable problem. We can talk about authoritative societies, but no authoritarian can actually control what you put into your mouth. It's only you can control it. And it ensures very, very, it saves a lot of money both to you and the state.
And in order to make people understand that and to act upon this understanding, you need an educational program, not a system of fines and other police measures. That was my point. Yes, the society is going to be more and more diverse, also in terms of health and in terms of your narrow status. We are not going to change that. We are not going to have an Aryan utopia of blonde, healthy, young people. We're going to have a lot of people who are neither healthy, nor young, nor blonde, but they are our compatriots. They are also citizens and taxpayers and workers. They contribute to society and they demand certain things to society from the society, but they also contribute to it. So this is the reality we are going to live in. We are not going to make everybody healthy, but we can, as you say, make societies healthier by, as I would say, educating them. I would very much argue in favor of changing the educational programs in kindergartens and in schools. The younger the children, the better. We do not teach them enough, or we do not teach them at all the meaning and the functioning of their own bodies and the importance of, as you say, what they put in their mouths. I do think that every child should be taught to cook, and every child should be taught what is healthy food and what is not, and what is junk food, what you should use and what you should avoid.
We have entered the fourth week of this so-called stay-at-home regime, which is not really obligatory, but at the end of the day, everybody, or many people seem to comply with it. I wonder how disciplined you are in observing the City Hall recommendation.
Well, I strongly suspect that being disciplined is rather a privilege. Being able to be disciplined, to be able to comply, is rather a privilege than a virtue. I can do that. I have a home I have some help. I have certain resources which do not make my situation materially tragic, so I can enjoy having my children with me and they can study online. We have enough devices. So it's not something that I did by being an exemplary citizen. I can do that. I can imagine people with different kind of jobs, bus drivers, cashier workers, medical workers who are not able to comply with these restrictions. So I'm thankful that I am able, and I'll be be able to do this for a few more weeks if it is necessary to my own health and to the general well-being of society. Like everybody else, I do hope it will be over. And like everybody else, I will be even more thankful when I'll be able to meet my students in person, because Zoom conferences are all very well, but it's not teaching. Well, it is teaching, but it's about 25% of what it should be. I do hope to see the day then we'll come back offline, and I do hope to see the day then I'll be able to come to your studio in person instead of doing what we do
I'm
now.
definitely looking forward to it, but before we say goodbyes, let me ask you one more question, because I think no conversation between the Russians is complete without quoting our great poet Alexander Pushkin, who once said that when he himself was under quarantine, that the mopes were worse than cholera, even though he himself turned out to be very productive in his own seclusion.
Unlike us, I don't think we're going to write any poems.
Well, that's actually my question. What's your personal recipe against the apathy and the asthenia that so many people are complaining about these days? And isn't that one of the unaccounted costs of this self-isolation regime? The fact that people are, regardless of their circumstances, they're struggling on the mental and psychological front.
We started our conversation with me saying that the quality of intellectual work, although it's so very individual, but the quality of intellectual work is going down in the absence of societal contact. So we do suffer, and the product that we produce suffers from these consequences. What I do is, I think what everyone else is doing, I try to keep my schedule in place. I have my Google Calendar, which rules my life. So I try to go to bed at a reasonable hour. I even started doing some sort of exercises, which I never used to do. I used so much to despise all this kind of thing. You know what I do? Skipping
This
rope,
is actually personal responsibility these days. You have to keep your immune system in a good shape once you catch the virus, once you meet with COVID-19. Seriously, you owe that to yourself and your kids.
I can't say I enjoy it, but I actually do it. And again, having my family around me is a great help. Children seem to enjoy it, actually. They don't have to go to school, and they have their parents with them. So they seem rather to like it. And if they like something, then we can hate it too.
Well, Ekaterina, it's always great pleasure talking to you, but in these times of isolation, it's doubly so. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Stay healthy, take care of yourself, and hope to see you again next weekend.